Hello there, it's Oskar, the Virtual Schule. This video is going to be something different than usual. In the before times, whenever I would go to an event to teach a workshop there, I would bring a paper handout along, containing all the plays and different concepts that were part of the workshop. It's always a nice thing to take something home with you from the event so that you can use that to actually go over the stuff from the workshop in your own training environment. Unfortunately though, paper handouts tend to suffer a very ignominious fate at the bottom of a fencing bag. So that's why I decided to try doing it in a video format instead. It should generally be a lot more accessible, even several weeks after the workshop, and in general it will also provide rather visual explanations instead of just text and images. So I hope it works out and that people like it. So let's have a look at the workshop. So before we get started, let's first have a look what the workshop is about. This is going to be an introductory workshop into greatswords, or montantes or beaten hunters. In the Netherlands, during the past few years, these weapons experienced a real surge in interest, but unfortunately there haven't been many people actually working with them before, so very few people are there to actually teach people how to use greatswords. And that means that we're just going to cover the absolute basics and a couple of really fun examples of plays from Figueyredo's rules on the montante, on Dürer and on the Goliath manuscript. Why these sources? Well, because I know them, because I have trained them, and because I'm reasonably confident that I could teach a fun workshop with them. Before we get started with that though, there's a couple of things that might be even more fundamental. Some basic rules of playing with greatswords, if you will. First off is to always respect the weapon. A greatsword is a lot heavier than a longsword, so you're about as likely to move it as it is likely to move you. If a greatsword is going somewhere and you're in the way, it's going to hurt you. So generally speaking, don't go faster and harder than you can control the weapon, because otherwise it's going to end badly. Very similarly, it's very important to warm up before training with a greatsword. Now, this goes for any weapon of course, but it's just that little bit more important with a greatsword. If you do a proper warm-up, you will seriously decrease the risk of injury as a result of training. Again, in a very similar vein, it's also important to check your structure. Checking your structure will prevent a lot of injuries as well, so regularly check if your stance is correct at the beginning of a series of strikes, at the end, and if you can manage that in between. And if joint health and longevity is not a convincing argument for you, then increased performance might be, because you're just going to be faster if you check your structure. Now, a final basic rule is that with greatswords, generally you should move big and step small. You take small steps because small steps are generally more stable and you just have a lot more weight that's going to be pulling on you on all sides, so more stability is very desirable of course. So generally speaking, keep your steps smaller than you would with other weapons. Moving big means that you engage your entire body, so using your core muscles with as much mobility as you can will really allow you to wield these weapons faster than when you would just be fencing from your arms. Keep these basic things in mind if you're going to be playing with greatswords, and you're going to have a lot more fun with them than you would otherwise have. Let's move on to some actual techniques now. We're going to be starting off with Figueyredo's rules for the montante, because those really cover some basics on how to move with a greatsword really well. Figueyredo has simple and composite rules, where the simple rules generally are relatively uncomplicated movement patterns with somewhat simpler footwork, whereas the composite rules are a bit more tricky to pull off. So since this is a beginner's workshop, we're going to be mostly focusing on the simple rules. And the first one is a very nice one to get started with. So we're making one cut from every side, stepping with every cut, cutting from below. From the right side we cut with the long edge, from the left side we cut with the short edge to maximize our reach. The second technique that we're going to be doing is very similar in setup, but instead of cutting from below, we now cut from above. Now you will notice that if you cut from right to left, it's a bit more difficult to stop it than when cutting from left to right. So in order to stop the cut when cutting from right to left, we actually stop the blade in front of our head. Now, when I said that we're mostly going to be doing simple rules, there's one exception, and this is the second composite rule. Why the second composite rule? Because it contains strikes from the middle, and I just really like that because it shows some of your core engagement and transitioning from a cut from above to a cut through the middle. So this is a fairly long one, but one that's definitely fun to pull off, and the focus of this particular rule for the workshop is actually the transition from first, in this case, a cut from the right, and then a cut through the middle from the left, and on the other side a cut from the left that transitions into a middle cut from the right. Of course, it's also a very important skill to be able to double your cuts, so to make a cut without stepping and then the same cut with stepping. So to that end, we're going to be working with Figueyredo's simple rule number 3. A final basic movement skill that I find very important is to be able to transition from a cut into a thrust. And to that end, we're going to be training the 5th simple rule as well, that you can see here. So we move on to some more fun stuff. One of the cool things about Figueyredo is that it has a couple of very situational techniques. So techniques that are meant to work in a given situation to solve a certain tactical problem. So what to do, for instance, when you have to guard a person. How do you make sure that no one can get to the person that's standing behind you? Another one is the galley gangway. So you're in a galley, say at the Battle of Lepanto, and you can only move back and forth in a very narrow area, and you have to make sure that you don't hit any of the rigging or any of the rowers that are in the benches below you. And the final one, of course, is guarding a cloak. Say you're taking a very nice cloak into battle that would get tangled up. You can put it down at your feet and then move around, cutting around it while making sure that no one can get to your cloak. Or a downed ally, for instance. Of course, I'd like to give this workshop a bit of a Germanic flavor as well. So that means that we move on to Dürer. Now, from Dürer's fight book, I've selected a couple of Gänge from the section on the sword. And although it's not necessarily said that this is about a greatsword, Jan Gosewinkel made a really convincing case that it might be, so I figured it would be fun to include it in this workshop. However, when you say Germanic and greatsword, of course you end up with the Goliath manuscript. So in the end I decided to not only include Dürer in it, but also one play of greatsword versus greatsword inspired by the Goliath manuscript. Meaning that we go through the first play that gets you a little bit into the longsword plays, but then with a greatsword. For Zornhaw Ortt, the movement pattern becomes a little bit different. The big difference with the Zornhaw Ortt with the greatsword is that it's a little bit difficult to shoot the point in as you normally would with a longsword. In order to deal with that, we tend to bring the blade up more so that we can actually bring the point towards their face. Now, another thing to keep in mind really is if you're going to be practicing this with a partner, keep in mind that the abnehmen might end up being a little bit powerful because you have a heavy sword. You might end up hitting someone in the head quite hard, so it's good practice to actually have your partner do a half parry just to make sure you don't strike through it. Now, the second one that we're going to be doing that's a bit fun is Nyder. So we have the regular winding, as with longsword, winding to a left high hanger if your Zornhaw Ortt gets parried. And from there, if they then go up, this is sort of a crown position, you can take the point down and set it on their throat. It's very easy to do this gently. We found that you have to either step into a position where your right foot is already in front or already have your right foot in front, because that's easiest to deal with the distance to conform to the illustrations. However, if you want to vary footwork with this, of course, no problem, you can do that. This is pretty much all I was planning to do for this workshop. I think it's a nice, fun overview that should get people interested in doing their own training with greatswords. But if you have any questions or would like to know some more about it, of course, let me know by leaving a comment. And of course, if you're there, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Furthermore, I would like to extend a huge thanks to my patrons, because it's because of them that I can make more videos like this. I really enjoy that, so thanks a lot, everyone. Alright, so by the time you see this, I'll probably have been teaching the workshop once or twice already, and probably enjoying myself at Winterkamp. So I'll see you all after that with a next video in about 2 weeks or so. So, cheers!